pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I have had an interesting reading week, and do I have any personal news? The only thing I have to say today is that I had my 2 shots yesterday, COVID and flu shot. I don't have the side effects as serious as I usually do when I have the 2 together, but I'm not at my perkiest, so that's why it's going to be short Friday Reads, but I'm doing not too bad. The other news is that I went to another book sale last weekend, and the stacks you see there, I hope you can't see any titles, because I don't want to spoil the book haul coming soon. I got more books than I could carry at the one about 2 weeks ago, and then the one last Sunday, I thought, okay, just buy 5 or 6, just a bag full, no more than a bag full. Well, I got 2 bags full, and spent more money than I had. But a charity book sale for the Symphony in Saskatoon. It's on a couple times a year. And then when I had shot my load, so to speak, and was waiting for my friends to finish browsing, I looked at one little section, and I think the sign was of particular interest to collectors, or something like that. So, off the beaten track, special books that only somebody who was a real nerdy collector would be interested in, and I was just browsing through it. And I found a book there that made me drool. I assume it's a first edition, but certainly a hardcover edition of the Jewish-Canadian writer Matt Cohen's novel, The Sweet Second Summer of Kitty Malone, which I read as an ebook maybe 5 years ago, and loved. One of the only novels I can remember reading and being satisfied with, about a couple that had a lot of conflict in their marriage. And just was a really deep look at that had humor, and there was so much else to the story, but at the center, this married couple that couldn't get along, never got along, but were deeply in love with each other. And I just thought it was a wondrous exploration of all that. And I've been keeping my eye open for a copy ever since. And there it was. The dust jacket, I have to say, was tattered, but it had one of those plastic covers over it. And I opened it up, and not only was it signed by the author, and I have other signed books by Matt Cohen, because I went to a reading he did in the 1990s. He died when he was only about 50 of cancer, sometime in the late 90s or around 2000 or something, which was just a tragedy, because such a talented writer. He did put out maybe 8 books or something in his short life. But so I had some signed copies, but I didn't have any copy of The Sweet Second Summer of Kitty Malone, which has to be the best title ever. And there it was, not only signed by him, but, and if you're not Canadian, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit, and inscribed to Don Heron. And you have to be my age or older, really, to know who Don Heron was. But Don Heron was an actor, and let's see, what was he? He wore many hats. Journalist, comedian, playwright, composer. Just one of those Renaissance men. He died in 2015, age 90. And in the maybe 60s and 70s, there was a long-running country music series, but I don't know if I ever saw it. It must have, called Hee Haw in Canada. And on that, he played a character called Charlie Farquharson. And Charlie Farquharson was a kind of a typical bumbling Canadian with lots of opinions, but not too much brains to back up the opinions. And it was a very comedic thing. And my grandpa Mooney just loved him on that show, and he had his books and stuff. So Don Heron wrote books in that character, and it's a big thing if you were of a certain age in Canada. Charlie Farquharson. Heron also became the head of the CBC later in life. As famous as Canadians ever get if they don't leave the country, Don Heron. So this was Don Heron's copy that was signed to him. Don Heron never lived in Saskatoon. How it got to Saskatoon. But it was $15, and I just, I can't. I'm just going to have to let it go. And so I tried to put it out of my mind, and I went home with my 2 bags of books that I'm very excited about, plus the 2 bags of books I got at the other book sale, and blah, 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 blah. But I couldn't stop thinking about that book, and thought, I don't think I can let that one get away. So that was Sunday, so I think it was either Monday or Tuesday. I phoned the Saskatoon Symphony. Their office is in the same building where the book sale is on, and this woman answered. And I said, "Are you in a good mood? I have a strange request." And so I explained all the stuff I just explained to you, and I said, "Would there be any chance that you could go find it and put it aside for me?" And she said, "Hang on." She was in a good mood, and 5 or 6 minutes later she came back, and I'd explained to her, "It's in this section, it's got a weird sign, like special interest, something." And she said, "Okay, I got it here for you." So, thank you so much. So, I am so excited that I followed up on that, and I'm going to go get it, and I'll show it to you. But it's not that beautiful because the dust jacket has got chunks out of it and stuff, covered with, what do you call that, Brodart or wrapper? But it's the inscription that makes it a collector's piece. I'm more than happy to skip breakfast and lunch one day to have that book in my collection. So that's my personal update. Grandpa Mooney must be smiling down upon me. All right, a really interesting debut novelist with an incredibly enigmatic premise for a novel. Let's go meet them. And this week's mystery guest is the Toronto writer Nadia Ragbar, joining us from Toronto to discuss her debut novel, which sounds absolutely fascinating. It's called The Pugilist and the Sailor, and we're filming this in advance, but it publishes September 16th. This will show up on my channel a few weeks later, but eager to hear all about it. Nadia, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Sean.
It's so great to meet you, and your novel just sounds incredible. So why don't we dive right in? Tell us about The Pugilist and the Sailor.
It follows a pair of conjoined twins who are adults, and they are joined at the waist. And in the sort of fictionalized world that they're in, they're amateur boxers. So one of them, Dougie in particular, is very passionate about boxing. His purpose in life is to be a boxer, and he's intent on going the distance with it as much as he can before they age out. They're like 34 years old, so they have until they're about 35. And his twin, Bruce, is a bookkeeper, and he's the more sensitive of the two, and he hates boxing, but he has gone along with it his whole life, partly because of the family dynamics, and he's just sacrificed his desires and always gone along with his brother. So the story really is about Bruce finding his voice and taking a stand. Part of it, he develops romantic feelings for a neighbor that he's seen. And so the romance that sort of develops through some letters that they begin sending back and forth is what gives Bruce a bit of confidence to try to go up against his brother to make a claim for a different type of life and like maybe less boxing. So
Wow.
that's the premise.
So obviously when the macho brother Dougie is boxing, of course Bruce is up there in the ring with him. What does Bruce do when
Well, Bruce is actually, he's quite a good boxer too. They're allowed to compete against one opponent. And so they're both working the body as one. So in this story, their coach sort of brands the Reuben Beast as a way for them to reclaim this idea that their difference is monstrous. So in the ring, they're known as the Reuben Beast. And so they operate as one body, though they are two distinct people. And so Bruce is a good boxer. It's just that he is very mild-mannered and sensitive, and he's just dreamy. And he's become obsessed with a sailor that he's reading about. In the book, the sailor's called M. And so M is a sailor who has gone around the world alone. And then he was in a race, the Golden Globe race, that happened in 1969, actually. And so instead of finishing the race, he would have come in like first, I think, in the race. He continues to go around the world a second time. He gives up. He abandons the idea of going back home, and he abandons the race and continues to sail. So Bruce is obsessed with this solo circumnavigation. So really, it's like this idea of how you find your autonomy. What does it mean to live independently? But also the importance of community, like them being joined, and how you live your life in compromise with all the people you live with, and how maybe our best selves only come into being in community, though this drive for autonomy is so strong, right?
how did this story come to you? What was the germ of the story?
It came to me because it was my master's thesis. And so I knew I wanted to write about characters in limbo and characters who had to make a decision, because at the time I was always in that headspace. And before I had tried to write a novel, I used to write a lot of flash fiction. And so I wanted to stretch myself a little bit and try to do something longer. But at the time, I remember I was really I had a lot of self-doubt about finding my voice and what was my writerly voice. And I was torn up about it for so long. And then I just gave myself the exercise of thinking of things that I loved, because those were things I didn't doubt. Like I didn't have much faith in myself, but I had faith in the things that I really loved. And so I thought of like books and movies and memories and stories that I knew. And so in my long list was this book, Geek Love by Katherine Dunn.
Okay.
Do you know that one? So that it was a book I had read and had stayed with me a long time. And so that's the story of like a carnival family. And so there are conjoined twins. They're not the main characters, but they're side characters in that novel. And then also at the time, I had seen a documentary that I really loved about the Golden Globe race. And so the sailor, Bernard Metissier, he's the basis for M. He's the one who sailed around the world and around again. So I took all these bits and pieces of things that were in my imagination that I was really drawn to. And so that's how the characters came to be. I also used to tutor. And so some of the kids I worked with, I had this one kid that I worked with named Bruce. So I stole his name. I worked with another kid named Douglas, who was like very charismatic, took his name. And so I had my characters. The female character, Anka, who comes in, she's, I think, a stand in for myself. She's also of Guyanese descent. And I think she was a character who I would have liked to have seen in books when I was a teenager and in my 20s. So that's where there's just this big cauldron of everything in my imagination. And it all just got whizzed up and blended into a soup.
This is just incredibly fascinating. So I have read one novel that was about the famous quote unquote original, and putting in quotes, it's not politically correct to say Siamese twins, but
Yes.
Chang and Eng. It was a novel by Darin Strauss.
Right.
Have you
Yeah.
read?
I haven't read that novel, but I did a lot of research on the twins Chang and Eng Bunker. And yeah, it was fascinating. I think between them, they ended up having 20 children.
Yeah.
And so they were from Thailand, Siam. So they had Siamese twins, right? Yeah. So
I,
actually, I give them a little mention in my book too.
that makes sense. I wasn't a fan of the novel, but it was certainly had interesting stuff in it. And there's been a lot of novels, and these I haven't read. Edwidge Danticat has a novel, Untwine, that's apparently about conjoined twins. Diane Setterfield, The 13th Tale. Barbara Gowdy, We So Seldom
Yes.
Love. Laurie Lansens, The Girls.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And Abraham Verghese wrote a book, and I don't know, maybe that's nonfiction, called Cutting for Stone. Tell us more about your research.
Yeah, so basically, I started with Chang and Eng Bunker. And then I was also just reading things online in pop culture. Like, I know there's a reality show with two girls,
Oh,
Brittany and Abby, I think are their names. So I was doing research about surgeries and the way that twins are able to live together and how they go about their day. And in particular, there was actually these two girls. The videos I saw of them online, they were about 21. They live in the States and their names are Carmen and Lupita Andrade. And they were just amazing. They're just so like badass and very cool and so smart. And I just really admired the strength and the grace that they just lived their life unapologetically. And so that was some of the things that I was watching and reading about as I was dealing with my twins, because I knew that, like, for example, in that Barbara Gowdy's one of those short stories, there's this trope of the good twin and the evil twin. And often you see that in twin stories where one twin has murderous intent toward the other or whatever. And I knew I wanted to avoid that kind of good and evil. And I wanted both of the men to be lovable and kind. I wanted the reader to feel on board with one twin sometimes and more leaning, siding with the other twin, so that you feel torn when they're trying to decide how to go about their day. And yeah, so that was where I was coming from. I really saw them as they are distinct people. They are two separate people. It's just that they, you know.
I am fascinated by the title, The Pugilist and the Sailor, because now that you've explained more about who those two are, the pugilist is Dougie. The sailor is in a book that Bruce is reading and being fascinated by. So
Yeah.
why did you choose the title The Pugilist and the Sailor? Bruce is not in the title, and that is not a criticism. That is just, I'm just curious about that. How did that title come to be the title?
I think Bruce, part of his decision making, he takes on the Sailor M as a mentor of
Okay.
sorts. So he sees himself as, he aligns himself with the sailor. So yeah, that's interesting because in my mind, Dougie's the boxer, Bruce is the sailor, but it's true, he isn't actually physically there in the title. So I think that's interesting too, because his whole life he's steamrolled by his brother and he's often sort of absent in their decision making. Like he is forced to go along with a lot of things. So I think that's interesting that you bring that up. I didn't even really consider that.
But so now I'm thinking that it's his title. It's Bruce's title. Those are the two influences in his life. That's what he would want this book to be called.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Oh my goodness. Speaking of mentors, there is a wonderful blurb from Miriam Taves here. This book is so strangely moving and truly funny and sad and beautiful. Miriam Taves is very selective about giving blurbs to books. Tell us about her in your writing life.
Yeah, she is amazing. So like I said, this was my master's thesis. I went to the University of Toronto. I did the creative writing MA there. And so she was my mentor while I worked on this project. And she is incredible and so warm and giving and generous. And so I was just incredibly lucky to have her to bounce the early draft off of. And then it's taken about like, I graduated more than 10 years ago. So this has been a long process to see this come to print. And so I reached out to her to ask her sheepishly if she would consider reading it again. And she's so gracious. She absolutely is so supportive. So I feel incredibly lucky that I was able to connect with her. Yeah.
Strong recommend. Taves. This is your debut novel. You have had short stories published here, there, and everywhere, and you mentioned flash fiction that was in a anthology, The Unpublished City, that was shortlisted for the 2018 Toronto Book Award. What are you working on now, Nadia?
Right now, I'm starting an early draft, a story that is about the unconscious patterns that repeat through a family. So looking at a family who are going through events that are unknowingly a repetition of their ancestors' experience and past. I want it to be experimental in form. I'm right now really drawn to a lot of experimental forms, and I want it to be something that's playful but also mournful. So that's what I'm working on. I'm just still in that phase where I'm figuring out what to put in my cauldron.
To circle back for a moment to your novel and to Miriam Taves, playful but mournful. That is the perfect description for Miriam Taves.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
And I forgot to ask you about, she says that it's truly funny. So tell me a little bit about the humor in The Pugilist and the Sailor.
I think my approach in life is I lean toward levity and that gallows humor type of thing. In my family, it's generally one like the coping mechanism is always to make a joke or find the light in any situation. I'm always looking a little bit more toward what's funny in every situation. So I think maybe it comes through just in the way the characters interact with each other and the way the siblings poke at each other.
And so you've had short fiction published in various journals and whatnot. Is there a collection of short fiction in the offing?
I had been thinking about it, but I'm not sure yet. I think, if anything, I will go back to Flash. I find short stories so hard. It requires such like masterful craft. And so right now I feel like the long form, because before when I was doing Flash, they were all really character driven. And I wanted to challenge myself with doing something longer, trying to understand plot. And so right now, I think I'm still in that needing a longer form. So I don't know if I have the chops yet for a really like perfect morsel of the short story. Though, yeah, Flash is always something I really like to do.
Tell us what you brought to recommend.
Oh, yes. So, in keeping with reading about experimental novels, I think all three that I've brought you fall under that category.
Wonderful.
So, the first one I have, you can see it, is It Must Be Beautiful to Be Finished by Kate Gies. It's a gorgeous book. She's a Toronto based writer, and it's a memoir chronicling the numerous surgeries she had up until about age 13. She was born missing her right ear. And so it's an exploration about medical intervention, the idea of body difference, what's normal, when the normal is oppressive. It's about public space and private space and how our bodies somehow in the public space, everyone feels entitled to an opinion or entitled to information. And so it talks about the violence of that intrusion, continuing on to other further violence that happens to the body. And it's incredible. It's so lush and just beautifully written. So I would highly recommend it. And it's written in these short vignettes. So that's where I find that creative nonfiction has this ability to play with form more than fiction often does. And each vignette is half a page to maybe 2 pages, but taken all together, it stitches this whole narrative. And I think it stands in for a lot of the surgeries that she was forced to have until she decided she didn't want anymore. And so this idea of stitching and piecing and putting things together, I think, is shown in the form. So that's my first one.
Fascinating.
My second pick is a book in translation called Cross Stitch by Jazmina Barrera, who's a Mexican writer. And this is translated by Christina McSweeney. And this book is about 3 women who have been friends since childhood. And at the core of the story is one of the women dies. She drowns. And so really it centers around the grief that the main character is dealing with. All 3 women they're very different, but they all connected over their love of embroidery and cross stitch. And so it really talks about the power, like the shifting power dynamics between these 3 friends and their coming of age. But interspersed in the narrative are chunks of, I guess, like the history of cross stitch and the place of women's craft and needlework. And so that's stitched in and woven into the text in these short vignettes. So again, it's the same feeling of weaving together a text, but then it's like textile arts and the text. So that I love textile arts and sewing and knitting and all that. So that really was a beautiful read.
Wow.
So, and the last book I have for you is
Oh,
this
good. I
this
love
one.
that, but I want to hear what you thought of it. I loved it with all my heart.
Yeah, it's exquisite. Little
Plus
Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian by Hazel Jane Plant. Another experimental form. And so this one is the main character, who I think is unnamed, is a queer trans woman, and she's exploring her unrequited love for her friend, a straight trans woman who has passed away. So this is another one where grief is central to the telling of the story. It's described as being very quirky because the book is a sort of a reference book or an encyclopedia of a fictionalized show that's highly bizarre and stylized and complicated. So each section of the story is talking about this crazy show that they used to watch together, but you get the story of their relationship and their pain and the longing and all of it. It's so exquisite was the word I used. It's just the way that it's rendered, it's so touching and tender, but quirky and strange. It's it's lovely.
Absolutely. It was extraordinary. And I'm not a big fan. I find too much experimental fiction, I don't viscerally connect with it.
Yeah.
Boy, Hazel Jane Plant brought it was a very emotionally powerful story about
Yeah.
friendship and love and sex. And this TV show, only watched it with Vivian because Vivian loved it. She didn't like it at all. But as a tribute to her, she's creating this encyclopedia of every actor and character and this and that. And it's fascinating and so moving.
Yes. I know. I would agree with you with experimental writing. A lot of the times I find it too cerebral. It's humorless and a little self-aggrandizing in a sense. And so
Yeah.
these
That one.
books are they're all heart. It's like a way that the form breaks open to allow so much emotion to come up to the surface. So I think all three books have that in common, I would say.
If you think they all compare to that one, then boy, they're going right to the top of my TBR. That's
Excellent.
wonderful. Nadia, good luck with the launch. We're filming this before the launch, but I'm sure the launch will be fun. This sounds incredible. The Pugilist and the Sailor. You are a wonderful guest. I'm already
Oh, thank you.
concocting reasons, including Toronto Bookstore nostalgia, to have you back. And
I would love to.
thanks so much, Nadia. So passionately endorsed by Miriam Taves, and it just sounds absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to get to this one. Nadia was a wonderful guest. All right, I managed to get one video published, and it's one that I taped in May 2024. I have all of these interviews with local writer David Carpenter about his books, and this one is about his. He had two books that came out basically concurrently. So is this his debut, or is the other one, Jewels, his debut? But this one's called Jokes for the Apocalypse, and it's got two novellas in it, that titled one plus another. And we had a wonderful chat about it all those months ago. If you don't think you have time or interest to watch the whole thing, I hope that you would decide that you do. But if you don't, there's a wonderful story he tells, and I'll put the timestamp in the show notes. At the top of my show notes, I always say the week in review or whatever. So there's a link to the video, but also I'll put the timestamp in where he tells this wonderful story about why the title novella in this book was dedicated to a man named Clifford Elliott. It is one of the best stories I've ever heard about stuff like this. It's about a 4-minute, something like that, 6-minute anecdote. Please watch that. And then you might just want to watch the whole darn video. All right, this is going to be mostly a vibes type of Friday Reads, but I do have one bail to tell you about, and I was quite disappointed about this, but I feel I definitely made the right choice. I bailed on the winner of this year or last year's International Booker Prize, Heart Lamp, Selected Stories by Banu Mushtaq, translated from the Canada by Deepa Bashti. I thought this was really a subpar collection of stories. There was one early on that I loved, and maybe one more close after that I liked, and then everything else was just awful. This is really a disappointing collection. I can't believe it won the prize. The stories were so samey. They were not very interestingly written. I didn't think the characterization was all that great. I was bored, so I was halfway through listening to maybe the story at the halfway point. And I got halfway through and, oh god, this is another one that's the same as the last 7. I don't care! It's not a good book. I bailed, and I'm sorry. But it was rather awful. So that happened. And I haven't finished anything, and I'm blaming it on my post-vaccination haze, but I got really close to finishing things. But that's it. So, what I really want to tell you about, one of the books I got more of a rhythm with again is from Shorty September. This memoir of being a land girl in World War II, Set My Hand Upon the Plough by E.M. Barraud. I had put it down for several weeks and I picked it back up and have just really connected with it. I'm about halfway through. She was a butch lesbian land girl. There's a picture of her. There isn't anything or very much else by her that's in print. I hope more comes because she's a good writer. It's very vivid. And one of the things she did when she was in this little village in Cambridgeshire in the UK, but she had been working in London as an insurance something or other, insurance agent maybe. Her name is Enid. I just see that in the introduction. I always save reading the introduction till I'm done, but it's Enid Barrow. Is that she worked on Wednesday nights, I think it was Wednesday nights, as the town librarian, and her memories of that are just fascinating, including that it was blackout time, and the library was open for a couple hours at night, and it was dark, and so they had a red light that identified it as being a library. And that was fascinating. I had to Google that to find out what that was all about. But her description of the literary tastes of the people in the community and the children that would come for books for their parents and the wife that would pick up books for her elderly father and all that with lots of vivid detail was just lovely. And she has some social commentary. She thinks the kids are not being educated well enough and they're wasting a lot of potential that they won't be able to make much of themselves later in life because their education is being neglected. And this caught my fancy. Young Stephen, a 16-year-old, used to come regularly to get books for his grandfather, old Bob. There's 8 in the family that are library members. And what sort of books did the young un get for his granddad? I'll read this. For a long time I was bewildered by Stephen's method of choosing. He seemed to have an unerring idea of the books he wanted, yet they were such a very Catholic collection that it baffled me. And I used to wonder what the old man made of sandwiching Conrad between Berta Ruck and Ethel Mannin, with a dose of Walpole, D.H. Lawrence, and Evelyn Everett Green thrown in. At last I discovered Stephen's system. When the old man had read a book, they put a little mark on the flyleaf. Anything without that mark was all right next time. And so some of these writers were unfamiliar to me. Berta Ruck vaguely, but I'd looked her up. The only other one that I didn't know was Evelyn Everett Green, and she sounds interesting. I won't explain anything about them. You can do that if you want. But the interesting one was Ethel Mannin. Because Ethel Mannin, I don't think based on the book I read by her, not that great of a writer. But I came across a book of hers, published probably around the same time, 1940s or something, in a second-hand shop, like a thrift store basically, in Tokyo. It was yellow pages, no dust jack, red cover, bright red cover, and it was like I bought it for $1, $2, and I'd never heard of her, but I thought, what the hell, I'm going to read this book. I think it was since I was on BookTube, so there's probably something about it in one of my videos, but it wasn't very good. But when I remember looking her up, and who knows, lots of good writers wrote bad books, right? So maybe there's others of her that I should try. She died in 1984, and I hope there's more to her than what I'm about to tell you, because it's pretty sexist for me to dwell on this, but she was romantically linked at one time with Yeats in 1934-35, and then later Bertrand Russell. So she has written some autobiographies that might be interesting, but I'm assuming she had lots of her own talent. I hasten to add so nobody mistakes what I'm saying, but I always knew she had a colorful love life. But what I really want to share with you is the last paragraph in that chapter. She describes the clientele and this and that and all the things about the colorful characters in the neighborhood and the rules for the library and overdue fines and all that. And then the last paragraph I'm going to read. And remember my explanation about the red torch. And I have not said a word about the books. Does that matter very much? Have books any raison d'etre, unless it be that they relate to life, help one to live more fully? I yield to no one in my passion for omnivorous reading. It was that passion that sent me seeking out the red torch in this small village. But books to me are an integral part of life, and although I personally derive immense and never diminishing pleasure from reading, and am more grateful than I can say to the really excellent service our county library gives us out in the wilds, it is reading as an adjunct to life that appeals to me. And the red torch has helped me to dig myself into this village, helped the moss to grow more quickly over the angular nakedness of my alien stone. I just love that. So that is the heart of this Friday Reads, aside from my fabulous mystery guest. I don't think I'm going to say anything else other than I'm going to sheepishly tell you about the 2 books I'm starting, even though I didn't finish any. I will be finished the penultimate novella for the novella project, and so I have 1 to go, and that is one I'm really excited about. It was one I suggested to Barb Howard in our introductory video, which will be linked in the show notes. Cheri by Joanne Beard. And it is a fictionalized account of the death of one of her friends from cancer. So I'm expecting it to be heartbreaking. And I've never read Joanne Beard, and if this goes well, there's a whole bunch more to read. And one of my top priorities as a reader on an annual basis is to read 1 novel, and I would love to make space for 2 novels a year. I'm going to live a long time, I hope. I'll get through them all. By Rosamond Lehmann. And this is the next one in chronological order. The Weather in the Streets, which was published 1936. And this is a sequel of sorts, and I didn't know that until recently, to the one I read last year, Invitation to the Waltz, which was in my top 5 or top 10 reads of last year. I loved it. I love all of her books, but I especially love that one. So it's the same character, Olivia, as an adult. The premise is a chance encounter on a train with a man she had a crush on when she was a teenager. I can't wait to get started on that. And that's what I got. Thanks for watching.